All right.
So, hello, welcome to my podcast. I'm so happy to have you today. I want to introduce you as my friend. You've been a friend of mine for years. I met you through a debating club, and you've also been a bit of my mentor, and you didn't realize that you were, but you shared with me a completely different perspective on the value of reasoning, which is why I wanted to invite you today on my podcast. So, welcome.
Thank you, Kirti. I really appreciate you inviting me to your podcast.
Share with me your tapestry of your identities, which I always ask.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Go for it.
I was born in Saigon, which is the former capital of South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And
Mhm.
Saigon was later on renamed to Ho Chi Minh City after the war ended. My ethnicity is Chinese, as both my parents came from the southern part of China. And I grew up in a large Chinese community where I was surrounded by almost entirely Chinese culture.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I went to a Chinese school at which I learned Mandarin and
Mhm.
Vietnamese. I spoke Cantonese at home. So,
So Mandarin, Vietnamese, Cantonese was your
yeah,
basics.
that's
Wow.
right.
Okay.
But I would say Cantonese was the main communication. Um, I would say communication skills or language that I have. And I should say all my friends were probably from second generation Chinese or maybe even third generation Chinese born in Vietnam, right?
Okay.
And after the war, my family and I moved to the US as refugees. And then we became US citizens 6 years later.
So and by then, what was your age?
I was in my early teens.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, 14, 15, around there. And I study. No. Sorry, I was at the age of high school, finishing high school, and then moving on to university. So I spent my last 2 years of high school in the U.S. Let's put it that way.
What was that transition like? I mean, you really got me started here. So I did not even know this, but yeah.
The transition was extremely difficult for me. I think the main reason for that was because I had a huge language barrier. I didn't speak English. And when I was in Vietnam, I was a very talkative little girl. And I enjoy speaking to friends and also at home, I was the very vocal one. But then ever since I moved to the US and I found out that I couldn't communicate. So it was extremely frustrating to me. But of course, uh, at that time, my I would say number one goal was to be able to pick up the language as quickly as possible.
What was the most frustrating part not being able to speak? At which parts was it? Because I'm wondering how that related to what we're going to talk about with the about reasoning and why that is necessary, or is it necessary to understand debating qualities?
I think it has something to do with it, and maybe we can get into that a little bit later on.
Okay.
Even for debating, to me now, I've been doing it for almost 8, 10 years. I still don't feel like completely comfortable, and I think that part of it is that language barrier. It still is deep in my subconsciousness that I can. It's very difficult for me to overcome it. Let's put it that way.
Can
Okay,
I
I don't
ask?
know whether you can understand it or not,
I
but
do. I do to some degree because I also have, well, English is I don't consider English my first language, but I don't have any first language. And I've always felt that I'm very been very conscious of the fact that I will make mistakes and grammar mistakes, and it's never going to be good enough. So I'm always walking with that. And when I hear other people debate and they use, sometimes the language seems quite intimidating. I think 10 times before I step on in the debating club and talk. So that's how I feel personally. I don't know how that feels for you.
I would say extremely similar.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yes. Yes. So I'm glad that we have that connection as well, because you came across as almost like English is your first language. And so I didn't even think you had that kind of concern,
Oh,
really.
yeah,
Mm.
I walked around it for many many years, and I even when studying here, I never realized I had to do English as a foreign language credits,
I
because I
see.
was like, but I spoke English at home, and then it was a whole different conversation. But it did affect me in speaking up about myself, and I think that is why I've been fascinated when I remember meeting you also. I saw this woman standing on a stage and saying and reasoning with others with such confidence. So I'm so surprised that we felt the similar way, because I never thought for a moment that is what you were experiencing. But what got you into the debating in the first place?
What got me into debating? That's a very interesting question. In the beginning, it was both curiosity and the admiration for people who can articulate so well and so confidently for what they believe in. All right. So
Yeah.
those were the two reasons in the beginning. I was curious when a friend actually invited me to a debating meeting organized by Toastmasters.
Yeah.
And that was about 10 years ago, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah, it was quite a while. If I remembered correctly, it was late 2014.
Hmm.
So I went along, just out of curiosity, and was immediately hooked by the excitement of debating from that moment on, believe it or not. And also, I remember around 2015, 2016 timeframe, there were quite a few Islamic terrorist activities against Western interests
Okay.
in in the UK, in Europe, and also in America,
Hmm.
and also in the Middle East,
Hmm.
which had triggered a number of high-profile debates about religion versus whether religion is violent or not, or hate speech against freedom of expression, and so on. So whenever I watched this type of high profile debate on the telly, or maybe on social media,
Hmm.
um, I felt like I was pulled by both sides because they all sound very convincing to me. Like if the proposition speaks, and I said, oh, that's right, it's so logical, that must be it. And then when the
Proposition.
opposition came back, and it was like I got pulled to the other side. Yeah.
So how did you, did that have anything to do with your past?
mm, I think I was very naive and gullible. Gullible was actually the word that my husband gave it to me, to describe me. And I mean, in the beginning, I just trust people, whatever they say to me, and if they can articulate well, then I would say, oh, that must be it. That I should believe that person. So probably naive and gullible, and I was like that before I started learning how to debate. So I can
Did,
be easily persuaded.
but okay, so does being, if you dub it as gullible and naive, did that ever work to your disadvantage for having that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. you you can be persuaded to something that is probably not true, or probably it's harmful to you,
Mhm.
right? Or harmful to others. So definitely that was one of the reasons why I want to learn debating and learn how to argue well, based on reasoning and based on evidence.
Did you ever find yourself wanting to express yourself and then feeling really, really stuck before you even heard of debating or knew you could learn that skill? Did you ever
I tell you, I felt that almost all the time before I learned how to debate and present, my arguments in a logical manner. Yeah, I felt it all the time. Even though I was a Toastmaster for several years before I was a debater,
Yeah.
I felt insecure in expressing my own opinion or judgment about societal issues or current affairs. So I kept myself very quiet, always being agreeable and never opinionated. Let's put it that way. And I don't know if you felt the same way. Earlier you
I
mentioned that
I
you didn't want to.
I I definitely have felt that way. I found myself questioning. I went to two extremes. I went to a phase where I was very rebellious, so I would just say what I was thinking, and everybody would try to curb it and say, "Oh, don't be so open or aggressive about it." And then you just think, "But I'm not," and I'd feel this frustration that if I voiced it, it would
Mm,
be shut down. And then I went to the opposite extreme of afraid to speak my mind. And I noticed that I was going more and more inward and
mm,
shutting
mm,
down
mm,
as opposed to speaking. So I found the value in understanding to reason and to debate without, for me in particular, it was about not getting nervous in the moment when I had to
mm.
express myself, because that I could navigate my tone of voice. That was
Yeah.
for me very, very crucial.
Yeah, I think the reason you either being very quiet or very vocal was not the true reason that you want to speak up. You just wanted, when you spoke up rebelliously, was because I just wanted to show that
I have
I
a
want to
point.
voice yeah, I have a point.
Yeah.
Whether that you really have a point or whether that point is what you truly believe or not didn't matter, right? I just want to speak. And also that didn't work, and then you revert to the other extreme. So being on both extremes are not really helpful in terms of making yourself feel like you are a valuable person that can give valuable contributions
I
into the
agree.
discussion.
But I also wondered this. I don't know if you had this, Lo. Did culture have anything to do with it? Because I know from my culture,
Mm,
or my South Asian roots. Let's call it South Asian because I'm South Asian and I also have Dutch roots. And Dutch roots, they prefer if you have an opinion. Whereas South Asian roots, they're like a woman shouldn't be so vocal. Did you ever experience from a cultural perspective not to speak up? Or was it just maybe language barrier? I don't know. What was your experience?
for me, both. It's a combination of both. And let me explain why. In terms of cultural differences, I I was born in a culture very similar to yours. Like when
Mhm.
I went to school, teachers didn't like students to ask questions. You just listen to the lecture and you memorize the content, and
Mhm.
then you try to do well on your exams, but not a lot of questions asked during the lectures. That's how
Mhm.
it was. And women are supposed to be, quiet, and that's the virtue the Asian or East Asian families would hold. It's like being quiet, being submissive, right? And that's the virtue that people or my parents or school would instill on me, okay, or in me. So that's part of the reason why speaking up is not always a good thing from that culture. But then that wasn't my personality. You see, I enjoy um, expressing my opinions. I enjoy that. That's why I enjoy debating. So it kind of worked against my character, let's put it that way, or my personality.
Yeah, it's almost like a conflict inside. I understand that part. There's a side of you that likes this, but then you're also told culturally no. And then when you moved to the States, you went into a period where in a university, you are, in a way, at least maybe I was exposed to it, have a point of view in university. Did you ever feel like you had language barrier because you
Mm.
said you were 2 years, so you had 2 years to follow up? Did that not inspire you during university years to develop that reasoning or that ability to express yourself, or was it the same experience of being told what to do or think?
In the university, all those years were very different. I was so, I would say, so focused on getting my degree,
Hmm.
and which was a technical degree. So I totally ignore the communication part.
Oh.
I went to an engineering school, and for that reason too, because of the language barrier. So I went to an engineering school,
Hmm.
and that was, to me, that was an easier choice than if I had gone to a normal universities and pick up, like, literature or history or humanities, that type of subjects. Okay. So when I was working hard on getting my degree in engineering, I really didn't have a lot of time to explore the communication part. So
Hmm.
those were, to me, those actually were the very important years to develop my communication skills, because I was still young and I could
Yeah.
pick up the language a lot faster, right? But this, under the circumstances at that time, I was just too focused on the getting my technical skills and education instead of communication. So
So that was your it's actually getting, it's almost as if when I'm listening to this, it's like this is your journey of finding your voice
much
by
later on.
much later on
Mm,
because of the barriers you face. Because when you do technical language, I've worked with some cohorts with women from Asia who are in really prestigious firms, and they have so much to share, but the technicality, they are leaning a lot on their technical skills,
mm,
but they struggle or are afraid to get to that, I have a different opinion, there's a different way of doing this.
mm.
And now I'm realizing more and more as I do these cohorts and speaking to you that it's really about not having English as your first language, so you're translating almost like three languages in your mind. Am I
Yes,
mistaken?
yes, yes. That's I I think that's absolutely right. And because of the language barrier, I would say that I missed a lot of opportunities in terms of developing my language ability.
Such
Uh,
as, can you give me an example?
well, first of all, the university, or the I went to a technical institution, and the institution did not even offer courses on communication.
Mhm.
Okay, that
Not at all.
you couldn't, not at all. It's just all different fields of engineering. You can take as many physics courses or calculus or whatever, but there was nothing on speaking skills. No humanity courses offered.
It's
So
almost like you get cut off, like you only get one It almost feels a little rabbit
Well,
hole.
because it was basically it was focused on engineering technical skills, right? So that was one. I would say one missed opportunity because the opportunity was not presented to me, and then secondly, it was because like I already said that we were so busy learning so many things and trying to study hard to pass the exams, and so I have no time to think about anything else. So that's another thing. It's only later on when I started working and I discovered, my gosh, communication skill is so important. You can't get a lot of things done without having good communication skills.
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. Here's what I do like. Because I always think about the first day when I saw you present. You were calm. You were, at that time, you took on a leadership role. You were calm. You had a sense of humor with the whole, reasoning. And I remember sitting in that debate and going, she's humorous, she's calm. And you brought it across as if, don't be intimidated to express a different opinion. So when you see that, why is that so valuable for us to have that attitude with
Mhm.
expressing your personal views?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. In terms of being calm, composed, is so important because people tend to listen to a more confident person than an insecure speaker.
And what if the person's loud?
Oh no, loudness does not add a lot of value to it.
Okay.
I still remember this quote from Desmond Tutu.
Okay.
He, this is one of his famous quotes, and he said, "Don't raise your voice, improve your argument."
Okay, hold on. Before we go further, because I want to hear about calm and composed. What's the difference between an argument and reasoning?
Oh, okay. Okay, reasoning actually is the main part of argument. Now, when I ask you, Kirti, what do you mean by argument or arguing with someone? Can you define the word argue or argument for me?
Can I
Try
define?
it.
Oh. To me, an argument is having a different point of view and being able to articulate it to another person who does not necessarily agree with that argument with your point of view. And so two people are dialoguing with two different perceptions or two different points of view. That's what my argument would be today. Asked me that a few years ago, I would have said, because I have a point to make and the other person has a point to make, and we are both voices are elevated and we're just trying to get it across. To me, it felt like a shouting match. That's what I would imagine arguing to be, but not today. So did I did I
I,
did I
I the
well, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but this is my understanding, and it gives me peace to that calmness you talk about.
yeah.
It helps me articulate myself because I think about the other person has a different perspective. Now,
Mm.
tell me, Lo, what is your definition and understanding to it?
Okay, I want to go back to the two definitions that you just
Yes,
gave.
please.
The latter one, when you say before, you used to think that it is not a shouting match.
Yeah.
But to most people, when they hear the word arguing or argue or argument, they immediately think of it's going to be a fight, a
Yeah.
shouting match or a fist fight or whatever, right? Or it could result to a fist fight, but at least it's a shouting match. But if you study debating or you study argument, argument is a technical term, and if you want me to give you the technical
No,
definition,
please.
I could.
Let's get a little
So
technical.
it is. It's going to to bore everyone to death, but
Okay,
I'm
keep
going to
it
give
short
it
and
a try.
simple so
Okay,
we
so
get to the meaty part.
yeah, argument basically has two components. It's a statement, what we call a claim or a conclusion, and then it's based on your rationale, and your rationale would be the reasons to support that statement or that claim,
Okay.
and that makes an argument. So an argument,
Okay.
technically, you got the conclusion or a statement or a claim that is supported by reasons. So you
All
have
right.
a bunch of reasons supporting it.
So let's put our communication skills into gear here.
Okay, good.
Give me an example. Give me an example to put what a conclusion looks like in real life, and in real life, but a real example. Is that
Okay,
possible?
I'll give you one of the most famous examples that most debaters would have heard of this. Let's
Okay.
say, okay, I would say the conclusion is Socrates is mortal because, number one, the first reason is um, all men are mortal, and the second reason is Socrates is a man. So I give you two reasons, right?
Okay.
Socrates is mortal is because all men are mortal, and
Mhm.
Socrates is a man. So
Okay.
those two reasons fits right into giving you that very solid conclusion.
I'm
Therefore,
holding on here because I want to say something else, but okay, go on.
Socrates is mortal.
Mhm.
So that would be an example, a classic example of what an argument is. Now,
Okay.
do you want to take it down? Go ahead. I want to listen to it.
No, my only poke is, but I'm doing it out of sense of humor. It's like, why is it man? Where's the woman? The definition of a man.
Now you're getting
I
into,
mean,
yeah, and that is a different argument now.
yes.
Okay, so you're
Yes.
starting another argument, and I would say, Kirti, that's fine. We
Yeah.
can have an argument on why men and not women, right?
Yeah.
But here, let me draw you back to the original argument: is Socrates is mortal. But do you think I have a strong argument? Can you take it down? And what would
Oh,
your answer be? See, this is another debating skills.
no,
Is
but
like
this is, yeah.
showing,
What
not
would, what's interesting for me on this one, it made me think of, you're arguing with your partner, right?
mm,
And your partner will say something, an argument like that, and the opposite, the other partner will say, but yes, this, that, and the other, and what happens then is saying, but I am talking to you about this point and you're talking about that point. We get into those arguments, we
mm.
get into it. So how do you, when you said, okay, but Kirti, let's come back to this point. That is the part where everybody gets really nervous, because that moment you shut down and think, you're not listening to me.
So the way to explain it to you, Kirti, is I will get to the second argument in a moment. So I'm
Mhm,
not ignoring your request, or I'm not totally, like not hearing you at all.
mhm.
You've been heard, but I don't want to conflate the two because those are two separate arguments. Let's get on with the first one and resolve that one first, and then we'll move on to the one that you really care about: is why men and not women. Okay.
Okay, so and then when coming back to that argument, I'm still sitting with this example. So we'll go back to the reasoning being man is mortal, and the second one was
No,
no,
yeah, the second
because
reason was
yeah,
Socrates is a man. Okay.
Socrates is a man. So
Yeah.
then I know we speak a lot about, and I think this was really key for me, is taking the time to understand what we define these words as, because you and I will obviously define them differently,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And I remember one of the skills I had to learn early on in doing a proper debate is understand how to define certain words and how does that hold weight. So that goes behind. Now it's like the makeup, the makeup behind it. Definitions like the makeup. How do you get to what's behind it? And to me, if I put that in real life, it makes me understand why I needed to now understand how each person defines certain things.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
how does that work in the reasoning? So now when you have reason, you
mm,
call it reasoning. So you
mm,
make the argument is, according to Socrates, man is mortal
mm.
because, and then you give two examples. And then behind it, what's the next step then? Because I told you what my next step is with the definitions.
Right. So the next step would be, can we get an agreement between you and your opponent to agree on the conclusion is sound, right? Is good, is valid,
Yeah.
and that would be the next step. And if your opponent keeps coming back with no, but you haven't addressed my issues of between men and women, then you'll try again and say, I will address it, but let's not conflate the two. Let's finish with the first one. And once you agree with it, then we'll move on to the next one. Is that okay with you? Check with
Mhm.
them and making sure that, okay, if they said, no, I want to get to this one. And you said, well, men, men and women, the definition thing is actually irrelevant to the first argument. So relevancy is so important. So we don't want to bring in something that is not so relevant. Then
Mhm.
the second argument, we will talk about the definition.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll talk about the difference between men and women. But right now, if you agree with me, the first one is resolved. The first argument is resolved. Then we'll move on to the next one. So when you move on to the next one, then you probably will bring in the history of the word men, men, or
Mhm.
man. Back then, you can go back to history, and that actually refers to the um, the entire population, including men and women. That's
Mhm.
the beginning of the history of that word, and then you can argue based on that history, right? Now
Okay.
I don't have all the premises laid out for you, but I'm just giving you a path how you can move on to a different argument by resolving the first one first.
Okay. What is premise? Just let's get the audience to know, because
Oh,
we
okay.
know technical language, but obviously somebody who hears it will be like, premise, what's that? You know?
Yeah, true. Premise is your reason. So remember, I told you argument is a technical term,
Mhm.
and it has a conclusion, and it has reason or reasons. So
Mhm.
you can only have one conclusion, but you can have more than one reasons to support that conclusion, right? So the premise is the reason.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, so sometimes we use those two words
Do two words
interchangeably.
interchangeable.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
premise.
So I'm always about when we reason. Now I use the word actually now more reason than argue, because I noticed that when I say the word argue,
Mm,
it's almost like I had to demystify it, because like you said initially, when we think about argument, it's there's comes a lot of like barriers in between my point
mm,
versus your point.
mm,
The who is right in the conversation, rather than how can we get to a different outcome. Because
mm,
debating club, you always is about, we take the audience's vote and we see who was able to be persuaded more than the other.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
in real life scenarios, if we take debating skills out into the professional world, or we take it into the personal life, because we do argue with our spouses, we do want to reason on certain, or even if we have kids, I've seen kids trying to reason with their
Yeah.
parents,
Yeah.
you know how you we going back to calm and composed on this one. So now
Mm,
you get the reasoning. Sometimes when we say the reason, it doesn't always land in real life to calm the person down, to listen to the back end of it. So the common composure, how can that play? How can we tame that to get to that part?
Yeah, yeah. Um, that's a lot to unpack, right?
Yeah, it is.
So in my experience is that I understand that life is not black or white. A black or white is
Yeah.
not right or wrong. When we say, oh, we try to prove that we are right, on balance, we might be more right than wrong. So
Mhm.
on balance is a very important word
Yeah, it
for
is.
me.
But yeah,
Okay. And also I want to bring another term into this discussion is
okay.
critical thinking, because it was a big part of me why I continue with debating, is because it helps me with my critical thinking skills, right?
Okay.
So you're going to ask, what is critical thinking, right? um, and critical thinking is for most people to just to understand it simply is, do I have reasons to believe that is true or close to the truth? If I have good reason to believe that,
Okay.
then I would accept that conclusion. So is, do I have good reason? Is not the right reason.
But what is definition of good reason?
So on balance, there are more positives than negatives. On balance, there is more right than wrong.
Would it be
And
right
that
or
would be
wrong,
good
or
enough.
more benefits or least
But
harm?
both, like when you are doing a values debate,
Yeah.
usually is whether it's right or wrong. It has to do with your moral judgment and all that. There's no absolute. You
No,
can,
there isn't. So it
there is,
makes me question the reason of truth. Because even with different cultures, like, when we were talking earlier, the truth of a culture is morally so different. So when we come together outside and we have to have a value based conversation, right?
hmm,
How, I mean, how do you reconcile it? How do you bring it across? Because that's always one question I always have to tackle in my world. But I want your perspective on it. I don't want my perspective on it. Yes, yes.
okay. I I would say my perspective actually is echoing some people who have done a lot of studies in this
Okay.
area, because it's not me coming up with this perspective per
Okay.
se. Okay, I'm not um, smart enough to come up with this, but
No.
let's say according to the guy's name is Peter Coleman, who is a psychologist, a professor at Columbia Universities, and an author who has studied conflict resolutions and the psychology of it for many decades.
Mhm.
And he had said this, which I thought it is so true, that we always, not we always, but sometimes we mistaken the word deep conflict with just disputes.
Oh,
So
please. I've never heard of this. Can you
yeah,
tell me more?
he explained it like a lot of disputes is like you and I disagree on something. Like maybe the word men and women,
Yeah.
it's like
Okay.
and that's a dispute.
Okay.
And sometimes a conversation like this,
Mhm.
maybe an hour talk, and then we can resolve that dispute. Or even between husband and wife, whether I should spend money on this or on that. That is a dispute that you
Okay.
can resolve it with discussions. But deep conflicts that have something to do with your identity, with religion, with your deep cultural beliefs and things like
Mhm.
that. It is not an easy thing to resolve. Don't expect that even a conversation or several conversations or
Takes time.
several weeks or
Yeah, it takes time.
studies show that sometimes it takes decades to really have honest discussions put in a certain setting that is in conducive to debating or discussions. Then people might resolve those differences. Those are deep conflicts. Okay, so let's not mix the two
Yeah.
and say, oh, how do we resolve conflicts?
No, but Lo, this is really interesting. I'll tell you why. Because when we talk about culture and inclusivity,
Mm,
especially in corporate cultures,
mm,
one of the things is that you're working with so many different identities. So there's a lot of different values from different perspectives. So when
mm,
we tell people to come in and be their true authentic self,
mm,
deep conflict is going to show up at some point. Do you see what I mean?
mm,
Because
mm,
you do have to think about your moral tapestry, somebody else's morals tapestry, when coming to make certain decisions or looking for something or the other. So the word inclusivity, I often think, can be very easily confused with, conformity or trying to get it homogenous. But what you're hitting on here is that it's always going to have, and it takes a while, it takes time for that dialogue to present itself or to go further. So would that not, so when I say women need to argue, for example, it doesn't hold much power. It's not, so it's not the case. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends, right? When we do have an opinion that we think is going to be beneficial for people to know and understand,
Okay.
but but other people don't believe it, and
Hmm.
then we should make a case to argue for that opinion that we
Hmm.
hold. Um, so in that case, I think we should argue, but it's not just because we argue for the sake of arguing, or just to be negative about something, or just
Hmm.
to prove the point that I can argue. Okay. Now I want to go back to the what you said about when we talk to people with different cultural backgrounds,
Yeah.
and no matter what, some conflicts might arise.
Yes.
It's true, right? Sorry. And it depends on whether, like I said, it's deep conflict that has to do with your identity, your religion, your cultural beliefs and things like that, or is it just a dispute?
Hmm.
When we talk about something, current affairs and things like that. So once we know it's in any case, let's put it that way. In any case, it's better to understand, have some knowledge about the other side's point of background and point of view first.
Hmm.
So before a debate, I would look at my audience and also my opponent and
Hmm.
determine, okay, what kind of cultural background that they come from, so
Hmm.
that I can do some research on that. If it's possible, I
Yes.
would do that to prepare myself. Um, like, for example, if my opponent is an African American, okay, and my audience is like multicultural, multiracial, let's put it
Okay.
that way.
Yeah.
And let's say the debate is about how to improve safety in our neighborhood. Let's put it, say that's the debate. And I can easily come across as extremely insensitive and out of touch with reality if I strongly advocate to increase police patrolling on the street, or put street surveillance cameras or have harsher punishments
Yeah.
for committing crimes. Let's say if I strong on those, then I would come across as totally insensitive.
Mhm.
This is because African Americans are sensitive to police brutality and racial injustice issues, right?
Yeah.
With with the police,
Yeah. This is
and
what
that's
statistics show.
yeah,
Let's just say so that we're not saying that's an assumption. Statistics show this. Okay, and then
yeah. Um, so how do I handle situations like that? And first of all, is if I already had that knowledge. So first of all, is I would acknowledge that I understand there is racial discriminations and brutality with police towards African Americans. So you lay it out first, and you
you
say
recognize, yeah, you
you
acknowledge
recognize that,
that.
acknowledge that, and and tell them that I do understand that, and then bring out your point about having surveillance, camera surveillance or more streets patrolling and things like that. You
Mhm.
point out the positives of those actions or recommendations that's good for the entire community, including the African American communities, and also point out some statistics that some of them actually really think that is needed to
Yeah.
be able to make the neighborhood safe for their children. So this, from that angle, you kind of you're telling the truth in a way, but you also understand their concerns. It's so important to make sure you go lay it out for them that I understand your concerns.
Yeah. My favorite, pathos.
Yeah. So I think that's one way to handle it.
Okay.
Um, but sometimes it may or may not work. But at least this is one way we can try. And if you come out with openness and honesty, when you argue with openness and honesty,
The
and the
time,
most important thing, most one important thing is, don't worry about whether you are being understood or not, but try so hard to understand them by listening to them.
so
By listening. The
the
key is
key is
listening to
the key is not
understand.
to be understood, is to be understanding.
Exactly.
Okay.
Don't worry about, you misunderstood me. You didn't hear me. You didn't hear what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this: you were wrong because you misunderstood me. That doesn't work very well.
Now,
Okay.
is that from your cultural perspective that you say that? Because I find some cultures lean towards wanting to be more understood before being understanding.
Are they successful in debating? Are they always win in
Um,
winning hearts
well,
and
from,
minds?
from media experience of viewing media, I wouldn't say that's been very effective of an
Yeah, that's
approach.
mhm. You
But then,
could have that culture, but it might not be very effective, right? Yeah.
so that's why I do question that from a
Mhm.
thoughtful point of view, as one would say, I guess.
Mhm.
When it comes to, so this month is going to be International Women's Month,
Mm.
and I'm very supportive. I've noticed a lot of women get very nervous when it comes to arguing, because there's always that feeling, and I hear this so often, oh, I'm too emotional. And so that's why I was thinking about reasoning. How do you discern that? What suggestions do you feel you could offer to inspire a woman not to think of it as emotional, not to feel like they're coming across as emotional? Because I also don't want to feel like I have to, or I or any other person comes across as having to be like masculine, because that also feels a little bit. boxed. So can you suggest? What would you suggest?
I would say, and this is actually from my own experience,
Yeah.
right? I have a loud voice, and I'm very passionate when
Okay.
I debate or when I make my case, especially there's a case that I truly believe in. Okay,
Okay.
sometimes we debate on something that we don't actually believe in, but
Mhm.
it's good to see the other side's perspective, and that's why we debate for that perspective. But let's say it's something that I'm very passionate about and I truly believe in, and when I debate, I become very emotional. But now, don't discount emotion. Don't just go with reasoning. Don't go just go with the head and not your heart.
How do you balance the two?
What how
From
you
your perspective.
balance it through is, first of all, for me is like I already had a logical case laid out for myself. First of all, is I do all kinds of research on giving very sound, good reasons with evidence to support that. I already have a logical case.
And you've
So
also thought about the people you're going to be arguing with. Okay.
exactly, and do enough research to see the cultural differences if that
Mhm.
exists in for this particular type of debate. Then then automatically, if something I truly believe in, I don't even have to emphasize it. It comes out. I would I
In your
would
tone of
become
voice or in your
tone of
presentation?
voice. Yeah, yeah. And you will see that I would speak with a lot of passion, and that's emotion, right? My passion will show, and sometimes I would I would say this, with my fist. That's okay. That's not a weak. That's not a weakness because
Okay.
you're
A
showing
fist,
that.
huh?
Yeah, I think we should be able to use our hand gestures and our emotions, our facial expressions,
Yeah.
whatever. And sometimes language is so important too, right?
Yeah. 100% agree.
Rhetoric, yeah, all of that. We should be able to use all of that
Okay.
in a respectful way. In a
I
respectful
was going to
way.
ask you, what does that when would that be considered respectful? Because in some arguments, when the voice and the tone goes up, it really can shut down somebody. I mean, I've worked with some cases where it's the tone of voice. Another person says that they stop hearing anything that is being said. The words no longer matter, but the tone has just shut someone down.
Yeah.
Even in a dispute or a deep conflict, either or in those cases. I've
Yeah.
seen it.
Let me ask you, if someone just show that tone of voice, just not throughout the entire presentation or
Mhm.
presenting the whole case, right? But it's only when it gets to the point where you speak something that is so emotional and so real, then
Mhm.
it happens at that point. You don't react, you don't go like, oh, I don't want to hear it, right? But if that person persistently going at that level is like, oh, they're bad and this is unacceptable, from beginning to end, that's when you would say, I don't want to hear it, right? So your emotion should
Mhm.
match with what you're presenting.
Your emotion has to match what you're presenting. But then we're going back to the word respect.
Okay, respect is like, some people like to throw out the f bombs every sentence or whatever to make that, like I'm a man, I am
Yeah, it gets
strong, or men
aggressive.
or
That's
women.
when it
Yeah,
becomes a bit forceful, as far as I can see.
yeah. And
Personally.
I would say you really don't respect a good part of your audience, because I don't like to hear it personally.
Mhm.
People use it once in a while, and it was coming out authentically, then I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly okay. But if it's using it to emphasize something and you overusing it, to me, it's not respectful. Okay, or not respecting your audience.
Yeah.
So that's one way. And another way is, being totally insensitive. Like the example that I used earlier about policing.
Yeah.
Being totally insensitive. The other side might come back with you and say you're insensitive, but you continue on to attack them, then I don't think you're debating in good faith. Another thing too is if you make a mistake or if you do agree with the opposition, then say it out loud. To me, to me that's courage.
Manage your pride, I call it.
Yeah, you call it manage your pride, but I would say, real courage is to be able to say, I am sorry, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
That's real courage.
Yeah. And I would add to that if you don't want to say the word mistake, because it can do a lot, especially from different genders or different race, the word mistake can hold quite a bit of weight, right? Especially because of historical trauma that's been passed down. So I say, well, you can always say, I didn't see that. And I acknowledge that I did not see that perspective. And by acknowledging it, you hold yourself in an attitude of respect that you're humbling within. And you're also acknowledging that there is a space for other points of view or perspectives. So, Lo, I know we're coming towards the end of our conversation. Where is a great starting point to understand reasoning in the most, not to be overwhelmed, because there's a lot of language with debating as well, and critical thinking. Where is a good starting point for anybody who wants to debate? And they're abroad. So just
based on my own experience, I can only speak to that, is start going to debating societies, debating club, just to sit in and listen to them first, like get your feet wet first.
Okay.
And then be patient, because you might hear a lot of jargons and a lot of terms that you don't understand. But keep an open mind and say, okay, these might sound a little bit foreign to me today, but slowly, I can understand the terms, and once I understand most of it, then I can be a good debater, or just as good as these people who are debating right now. So be open-minded. And another starting point would be go to one or two workshops, on debating skills, or what would be good. I always ask people to, try to look for critical thinking skills and things like that. Go for those workshops and start from there.
Okay.
But now the important thing.
But what about when the elections come up? What could they do when they're observing elections? Because there is debating in elections. Is there a starting point how they can observe a election?
Yeah, absolutely. That would those type of debates are unique. Okay, and some I think in the UK you probably would get more of a real debate among the candidates, right? But in the US, it's like the setting is very rigid.
Okay.
And sometimes, you don't have a continuity, like question asked, but then the candidate didn't respond, and that was it. Like it get pushed away or forgotten, and sometimes you don't really get a good clash between candidates.
Okay.
So I would say, yeah, if that interests you, that would be a starting point too. Listen to presidential election debates or prime minister elections,
And
debates.
how can you, maybe I'm asking much, but how can you, what is a tip to understand the discernment? Because when I think of critical thinking, I think of discernment. Uh, discern between reasoning and point of view, or not point of view, reasoning and truth, if that's such a thing.
Um,
How to find the reason? Let me rephrase it. How do you find the reasoning when they are listening to these debates?
well, the reasoning from the candidates, right, or from the presenter, is that what you
Mhm.
from the debater? The If it's a good debater, that person should provide the reasoning to you. So I think your question is,
Yeah,
how
I'm
do
not
you
asking
discern
a
whether
question.
that they are good reasons or not?
Yes,
That's
yes.
what you
I,
mean.
I'm trying to. I'm like, no, I'm not hitting the right question. But yes, what is a good reasoning? How can they find a good reasoning in an argument? How did they able to listen to it and then digest it, to question it?
Okay, yeah. So you try to evaluate whether the reasons are good reasons or not. Number one is the reason given,
Hmm.
is it relevant to what they're discussing? Is it relevant to the issue?
Okay.
Okay, so relevancy is very important.
Okay.
Okay, and then and then the next thing is there any logical fallacy in
What is
there?
fallacy?
Now that's the thing. There are so many logical fallacies. Logical fallacies can happen
What
and
is fallacy?
everywhere. Okay, so
Very quick.
fallacy, very
Yeah.
quick, is an error in thinking. So a short definition is error in thinking.
Okay. So it's
Okay,
not really something true.
is an error,
An
and it's
error.
a fallacy can be different from truth. Don't get the two mixed up.
Okay.
Okay, um, true truth can be you have. Gosh, this is going to take
I
another couple of
know. We
hours.
have
Let's
to keep
not
it
get into
short.
this, but let's
Okay.
just put
Error of
down that,
thinking.
yeah,
Okay.
fallacy is error of thinking. But
Okay.
truth, just think about, there's no, very often we don't get absolute truth, right?
Okay. So
So
look at
what
the
we try to
reasoning.
do is, yeah,
Yeah.
to get closer to the truth. And then you have
Okay.
facts, right? Facts is one type of truth. And facts is usually, like right now, there's a fact that I'm talking with you, Kirti,
Mhm.
right? I hope I'm not talking to a robot.
No,
I know nowadays is like very scary.
no, we're not. I'm not AI yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're not AI yet, and I'm not AI. So that's the fact. Um,
Okay.
but truth is something else. Like you said, different cultures would look at truth might
Okay.
be
So
differently.
three things: relevancy. Start with relevancy. Logical fallacy, looking for that error of, being aware of error of thinking will happen, and
Mm-hmm.
then observe facts. Well, those are three
Well,
three.
no, not observing facts. The third one is actually asking yourself, do you have um, any reasons to believe it, or any good reasons to believe it?
Any reasons?
Whatever they, yeah, do you have any good reasons to believe it? Like if
Okay.
candidate A says that this policy I am going to implement when I become the prime minister is going to be good for you, then
Mhm.
then you listen to his reasoning why it's good for you, and then you ask yourself, do I have good reason to believe that what he's saying
Okay.
is true, or
Okay.
close to the truth?
All
So
right.
so those
I'm
are
gonna.
the criteria, I guess
Okay.
you can judge that.
I know we can talk for hours on this because
Yeah.
I'm always learning from you, but we have to call it. I'm going to ask you to come on soon again. I can just feel it. But thank you, Lo. Thank you for sharing. I really, you've, as always, you always open my mind to shift my perspective, reflect on things differently. So thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
All right, you're very welcome, and it truly is my pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank
So thank you for having me. So bye now.